Good afternoon. Welcome to the Washington Foreign Press Center. It's our distinct pleasure to be joined today by State Department spokesperson Matt Miller. Matt will offer some opening remarks, and after that, we'll be glad to take your questions. As a quick reminder, when we open for questions, please do wait until you're handed a microphone before you ask your question. And also state your name and outlet. And we would also ask you to keep your questions brief so that we can take as many questions as we are able to. This briefing is live streamed, and the transcript will be posted online after the briefing at fpc.state.gov. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome spokesperson Matt Miller. The podium is yours.
Thank you, Zena. Thank you all for being here. Let me just start with some opening comments. It is an honor to be here at the Foreign Press Center as we reflect on the work that we have done over the course of the Biden administration the past 4 years. I want to mention that it has been one of the highlights of my time as the State Department spokesperson to engage with the foreign press on a regular basis, both at the State Department, where a number of you come and ask questions. I see a number of familiar faces in the audience, including some who were at my briefing that ended, I think, about 20 minutes ago. So you made it over here quickly. But also on the trips that I've accompanied the secretary with overseas, where he engages regularly with the foreign press and takes questions from the foreign press, as he does here in Washington as well. I do want to take a moment before we get to questions just to express my deep respect for the crucial work that all of you do every day, both here and abroad. In a world that is increasingly complex and often uncertain, your role as truth seekers has never been more important. You play a critical job in holding all of us who hold positions of authority to account, in making us show our work and making us defend the choices that we make. And I know it makes the United States stronger. I believe it makes every country in the world stronger when there's a free press that can operate to expose corruption, to expose wrongdoing, to make policymakers defend the decisions that they take on behalf of the people that they represent. I also want to acknowledge the personal sacrifices that you and your colleagues make in pursuit of your work. In far too many places, journalists are harassed, independent outlets are forcibly shut down, voices are silenced, and yet, despite these immense pressures, you continue to persevere. It is your commitment to truth and justice that we find inspiring. It serves as a powerful reminder of why defending press freedom remains a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. And I will say on behalf of the Biden administration, not just defending press freedom, both here and abroad, but also defending journalists when the work that they do puts them in harm's way. So one of the things that Secretary Blinken made a top priority at the direction of the president was securing the release of the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was imprisoned in Russia for the supposed crime of being a journalist, of answering questions, of covering and exposing wrongdoing. And we worked to secure his release and bring him home. In the same way that we are now working to locate Austin Tice in Syria, a journalist who was in Syria covering the brutality of the Assad regime. We're working to find him and return him home to his families as well. We will continue that work. With that, happy to take your questions. And I will say that for those of you, I see one hand up and one I know, those of you that were just at my briefing and asked a question, I will come to you last if there's time before I get to others in the room who haven't had a shot so far today. Go ahead.
Taking my question.
Yeah.
I'm Khushbu from the South China Morning Post. Just wanted to get, for the last 4 years, you have worked with China and Chinese government closely on various issues. If there's anything, you are some kind of advice or tips that you're giving to the next administration and how they should deal with this very delicate relationship. Yesterday, Donald Trump said that U.S. and China can work together and solve all of the world's problems. If you want to say anything on that, thank you.
It's a really great question. I won't talk about it so much in terms of the advice that we will give to the next administration, but I'll talk about it in terms of how we have seen our work and the importance of our work. You've heard the secretary say a number of times that the relationship between the United States and China is the most consequential relationship in the world. The decisions that our two countries make and the contesting of relations, the contesting of issues between our two countries has enormous consequences, not just for the people that live in the United States and the people that live in China, but really for people all over the world. We have tried to approach the relationship. Let me back up and say, when President Biden took office, he tasked his team immediately with taking a 360-degree look at the relationship between the United States and China and identifying where we needed to look at U.S. policies in the past, the policies that were handed to us by the previous administration, in some cases that had outlasted administrations before them, and to revise them and strengthen them when we saw the Chinese taking action that threatened our values, and where we and also find ways that we could work with them. So in terms of how we've approached that, so we have on the domestic side identified a few key technologies that are U.S. technologies that we believe are core national security interests, advanced semiconductors, for example, other chips and other equipment that we believe could be used for military purposes for China that we have restricted China's access to. And I will say at great complaint from the Chinese government. I've been in the secretary's meetings with the Chinese government where they accuse us of trying to stifle them technologically. It's not what we're doing, but we're not going to provide technology that can be used for military purposes by a country that we believe has interests and values that are contrary in many respects to ours. We've also set out to strengthen our diplomatic relationships, both with China's neighbors and other countries around the world. And so one of the things I think we have been successful in doing is working not just with some of China's neighbors who have real concerns about the positions that China takes to menace its neighbors, to try to seize territory that is rightfully under international law controlled by its neighbors, to try to economically coerce its neighbors. But we have also brought countries in Europe together to share some of those concerns. I think when we took office, you saw a number of European countries who were kind of wondering about America and wondering about the direction of America, and were hedging their bets and hedging in many ways towards China, and we have reversed that trend. And we have gotten countries in Europe concerned about some of the actions China has taken in Asia. And we have gotten countries in Asia concerned about some of the actions China has taken in Russia, in Europe. And when I refer most importantly to the burgeoning security relationship between China and Russia, the fact that China is helping Russia reconstitute its defense industrial base. So I would encourage not just the incoming administration, but every policymaker to be very clear-eyed about the challenge that China faces, and to understand that the best way for the United States to confront a China with very different interests and values than ours is to do it with our allies and partners around the world, that we are stronger diplomatically, we are stronger economically when we work with other countries who share our values. And there are other countries that want to work with us on this question, and we've proven that over this administration. And then finally, the last thing I'll say, and I realize this has been a very long answer, but it is an important question. Despite the competition between the United States and China, and despite the issues where we have serious concerns, and when we go and meet with them, we are very direct about those concerns, and they're very direct about the things we're doing that they object to and they don't like. We have believed that it is in the interest of the United States to find areas that we can work together when it is in our national interest and when it is in the interest of the world. So when it's in our national interest, for example, curbing the flow of fentanyl, which has killed millions and millions of Americans, the number one leading killer of young people in the United States, where we have pressed China and gotten them to make progress on listing precursors, preventing the export of some precursors, or restricting the export, I should say, of some precursors which can be used to manufacture fentanyl, something we believe is in the core national security interests of the United States. We have gotten them to reinstitute military-to-military communications between our two countries to, when there are times of tensions, to try and keep tensions from escalating into conflict or confrontation. And where we think it's important to try to work together is on global concerns. So we have pressed China on a number of occasions to use their influence with Iran. Iran's a country that they have productive working relationships with. Obviously, we can't say the same for the United States for a variety of reasons. We have told them that they ought to press Iran to use its influence in the Middle East to pull back the proxies that are such a destabilizing force in the Middle East. We have pressed them, our allies in Europe and other countries have pressed them to use their influence with Russia to try and get Russia to pull back from some of their menacing activities in Ukraine. And with, I will say, very limited success, but there have been at times in a few discrete areas where we have seen them make an impact, and I think that's an important policy to continue to pursue. Yeah. Yeah. You. Hey.
Presidencialia, Global News Georgia. I have a question on Georgia, if I may. Yesterday, you mentioned that additional sanctions would be imposed on Georgian officials in the coming weeks. Are you considering economic sanctions as well, with visa restrictions that have already been announced? And also, why has it taken so long? Is it because you are reviewing further evidence, or maybe there are some other reasons for that?
Let me say a few things about that. Number one, I'll just say, and I get this question a lot about sanctions, not just with respect to Georgia, but with any number of countries with which we impose sanctions, is that people often think of sanctions as the only tool in our toolbox, and sanctions are one of the tools available to us to hold accountable countries taking decisions to which we object and decisions that we believe run contrary to not just the core values we endorse, human rights, the right to for people to express their fundamental democratic freedoms, but for, values that countries all around the world endorse. So when it comes to Georgia, if you look at the actions that we have taken, we've been quite clear about the anti-democratic path that Georgia has been on recently and the democratic backsliding that we have seen take place in Georgia, and we have been clear in our response to that. And so you have seen to date the Secretary announce a fundamental review of the relationship between the United States and Georgia. And as part of that review, we have already suspended $95 million in assistance that goes to the government of Georgia because we have such serious concerns about the actions they have taken. We have already imposed sanctions on Georgian Dream officials for their involvement in serious human rights abuses during violent protests, during their violent response to peaceful protests. We have imposed visa restrictions on more than 100 individuals that were either responsible for or complicit in undermining Georgian democracy. And we have suspended the U.S.-Georgia Strategic Partnership Mechanism. So in response to the kind of question about what has taken so long, it's not like we've been doing nothing all this time. We have been taking steps and to make very clear our concerns. And really, this is important, to give the government of Georgia a chance to reverse course, right? We made clear we didn't move kind of from 0 to 100 on day one, because we've always made clear with the government of Georgia that there was an alternative path available to them, the path that we believe their people are calling for, that their people support. And time and time again, when they face the choice, they have not pursued that path. And so you have seen us ratchet up our response, and we will continue to ratchet up our response, including additional sanctions. And I won't preview exactly what the nature of those sanctions will be, but before the end of our tenure, yes, we will be imposing additional sanctions on the government of Georgia. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for taking this question.
Yeah.
I'm Jose El Pino, NTN24 for Latin America. Let's talk about Venezuela. On January 10th, Nicolas Maduro intends to begin his new term as a president after the electoral fraud. And one of the questions is, do you intend to take any additional pressure measures before January 10th in order to elevate the pressure on the regime? One of those could be, for example, revoking License 41 for
Yeah.
Chevron. And also, I would like to have your take on the situation of the Embassy of Argentina in Caracas, which is under constant pressure of the regime.
So I'd say with respect to the embassy, let me take that one first. We believe that Venezuela ought to respect the diplomatic rights of its neighbor, full stop, period. When it comes to our policy on Venezuela, so I'm not going to preview any actions that we may or may not take. Obviously, we have a range of tools available to us when it comes to Maduro and his representatives. Here again is another case where, look, the Maduro regime had a chance to address the legitimate concerns of their people. And we, along with a number of our allies and partners, made clear to Maduro that there was a path forward for him to see all of the sanctions on his country lifted, to see a return to normal relations between our two countries. All he had to really do is one simple thing, and that's to hold a free and fair election and to respect the will of the Venezuelan people. And he didn't do that. And so you have seen us already take steps since the conclusion of that election and the outright theft of the election by Maduro, the suppression of his own people, who again came out and peacefully protested and were violently repressed in the wake of him stealing the election. And so we continue to look at what steps would be appropriate. And I should add, we continue to consult with our allies and partners, including in the region, about the response moving forward. I think it's very important that whatever we do or steps that we take with other countries who share our concerns, and it should be clear, this is not and never has been the United States acting alone. We see other countries who have very serious concerns about the way Maduro has continually suppressed the will of the Venezuelan people, and will continue to consult with those countries about what the path forward ought to be. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much, man. Igor Nemushkin, RIA News Agency, Moscow. So on General Kirillov's assassination, you stated just about an hour ago that the United States was not aware in advance and was not involved. After he was killed, have you received any information or engaged with Ukraine, as New York Times has recently reported that Ukraine Security Service was responsible for his assassination?
I don't have any private diplomatic communications to speak to today. I can tell you that the United States wasn't aware or involved in this attack, and every country can speak for themselves about the extent of their own involvement. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Jahan Ali from ARY News, Pakistan. Bharatiya Janata Party, Modi's political party, BJP, alleged that the US State Department was behind the targeted attacks against Prime Minister Modi and his friends and trying to destabilize India. What is your response to this kind of statement? And secondly, Assistant Secretary of State Donald Lu was in India, and you have been asking since long for the accountability of by Indian government of the agents involved in murder plot for US citizen. So was there any discussion on that? Thank you.
So with respect to the first question, I'd say quite simply the allegations are false. We provide professional development training for journalists around the world as part of the commitment that we have to freedom of expression and press freedom. For that somehow to be associated with undermining what is a close partner of the United States is just absurd. It's completely not true. And I will say with respect to the second question, so obviously we have made quite clear our concerns about transnational repression. We have made quite clear our concerns about the plot against an American citizen. You've seen a Department of Justice indictment returned in the matter of a plot to kill an American citizen. And we have made those concerns quite clear to the Indian government on a number of occasions. I'm not going to speak to Don Lu's most recent visit, but I can tell you in all of our senior level engagements with the government of India, this is a matter that we raised. They have opened a commission of inquiry to look into this matter. We have been regularly briefing them on the results of our investigation. I will say when we, not just the State Department, but other agencies inside the United States government, and we have been receiving reports from them about their own commission of inquiry. And what we have emphasized to them is that what we ultimately want to see for this crime is accountability. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Nomanish Fak Mughal, Parliament Times, Pakistan. 2024 saw elections in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. There has been perception that US was very vocal about irregularities and rigging in Bangladesh election, but US was soft about irregularities in Pakistan. What's your take on elections in Pakistan? Were the United States satisfied with the elections?
So our take on election in Pakistan is consistent. Let me just speak to a broad principle that the United States supports anywhere in the world, is that we want to see people all across the world able to express their free democratic will, and we want to see their votes fairly counted and their will respected. And we've been vocal about that in countries in Southeast Asia, but you hear us advocate for the same things, and we do it not just in our public statements, but also in our private engagements all around the world, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in North and South America, because it is one of the fundamental principles on which the United States was founded. When it comes to election irregularities in Pakistan, we have spoken to it, and I'll say I have spoken to it a number of times from my podium at the State Department in my daily briefings, and made clear that any election irregularities need to be fully investigated. They need to be answered, and they need to be dealt with consistent with the rule of law. And that's true for Pakistan. It's true for every country in the world. Yeah.
Uh, how do you assess the Korean government's response following the impeachment of President Yoon? And do you think there will be any changes in Korea-US relations under the Trump administration?
So the second part is easy because I'm not going to answer it. Um, which is just to say that I'm a spokesman for the Biden administration. I have that job for another 34 days. And I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to try to speak for, or even to try to opine on what the incoming administration is going to do. Obviously, they will make their own policy choices about their alliances and partnerships around the world. I will say that the alliance between the United States and Korea is one that is decades strong. It is the cornerstone of security in Southeast Asia. It is a fundamental alliance for the United States, and I think it's safe to say that the alliance that has lasted through presidents of both parties will continue to be strong and last through presidents of both parties well into the future. When it comes to the recent actions in Korea, including the president, so you saw us make clear our initial concern about the actions that were taken in Korea, and what was important for us in watching how Korea responded to that is to see that Korea's democracy, which was very hard won decades ago now, and it seems like ancient history to some. I know some in this room that are not old enough to remember it, but sadly I am. Hard-won democracy that nothing should happen that would in any way weaken or undermine that democracy. And what has been so heartening to the United States is that over the past few weeks, we have seen Korea demonstrate its democratic resilience and resolve its political differences in accordance with the rule of law, in accordance with a process that was laid out in its constitution, and that is appropriate for all democratic nations to do. So we are ready to work with Acting President Han and the Republic of Korea government. Our engagements with the government of the Republic of Korea have continued throughout the past few weeks. Secretary Blinken had a conversation with the foreign minister, I think it was about 10 days or so ago now, consistent with his regular engagement with the foreign minister. And our assistant secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Dan Crittenbrink, was in Korea just in the past week or so, continuing our work to build our fundamental alliances. And I'll just say, one of the things that we are most proud of in this administration, I talked about our China policy earlier, and our Indo-Pacific policy. One of the things that we have been that we have put a lot of focus on is strengthening our alliance with Korea, strengthening our alliance with Japan, and really uniting two allies who have been allies of ours, but obviously have had tensions going back decades, turning that into a trilateral relationship through a historic summit between our three presidents, but then also through regular meetings between our three foreign ministers and our three defense ministers. We think that engagement has been critical to the security of our three countries and also critical to security and stability in Asia. And I hope it's something that continues for years and decades to come. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sang Lee from the Korea Economic Daily newspaper, and this is gonna be a follow-up question about the Korea situation. So, recent allegations have emerged in South Korea regarding President Yoon's alleged preparations for martial law in early December, and according to the testimony in the Korean National Assembly by a prominent YouTuber, there are claims that President Yoon's administration planned not just to arrest but to eliminate political opponents, potentially using South Korean military personnel disguised as North Korean forces to create a false flag operation. And while the credibility of these claims remains very unverified, I would like to ask these questions to the United States. That first, the person who made these allegations in the National Assembly claims to have received this information from an allied nation, with many speculating it was the United States. So, does the United States possess any intelligence regarding President Yoon's alleged preparations to eliminate specific individuals? And secondly, I would like to ask, well, when Deputy Secretary Campbell and other United States officials commented that President Yoon had badly misjudged this situation, were these assessments based on classified intelligence that the United States had independently gathered?
So I think you'll understand why here in an open setting on camera in front of a bunch of journalists, I'm not going to discuss classified information, which is not to confirm whether there is any such classified information, but it's certainly not to talk about intelligence assessments from a podium in front of a room full of journalists, as much as I do love and respect all of your work. I will say, with respect to the information that you mentioned, I'm not aware of any such information coming from the United States government. And I would say, with respect to those allegations, those are all allegations that ought to be handled by Republic of Korea authorities consistent with the Korean Constitution and Korean law. That's what it means to be a democracy grounded in the rule of law, is that when you have questions like these, you deal with them using your independent law enforcement mechanisms and judicial mechanisms, and if appropriate, political mechanisms, and you handle them you handle them through peaceful, legal-based mechanisms, and that's what we've seen happen over the last few weeks in Korea, and that's what we expect to see happen going forward. Yeah, yeah, right there.
Hi, Yasmin Al-Sabawi with Middle East Eye. Couple of questions. I'll start with Syria. We've seen a couple of international delegations head to Syria. There seems to be an effort by some countries to normalize again. Where is this administration on lifting the bounty on Al-Julani and also, heading on the path to delist HTS? And second question on Gaza and this sort of impending ceasefire. We saw this morning that Hamas put out what is maybe one of the most optimistic statements yet about eventually reaching a ceasefire. But also, we sort of can't discount the timing of all of this. We saw with the Lebanon ceasefire that some members of the incoming Trump team very quickly took credit for that. What does that tell you about this administration's standing when it comes to the parties, just given there's so much talk about the looming Trump administration, and that's why things are moving at the pace that they are?
Look, I will say, if we are able to get a ceasefire to this horrific conflict in Gaza, I'm happy for anyone in the world to take credit for it, as long as we get it done. That's the fundamental bottom line. We have invested so much time and so much energy into trying to get this ceasefire over the line, and have been so close so many times that it really has been frustrating that we haven't been able to get there, because the toll of this war for innocent civilians in Gaza who continue to die, who continue to suffer, to innocent hostages who continue to be held away from their families, to their families who, of course, miss them and want them home. We believe that we are at the point where we ought to be able to get to an agreement. The differences between the two parties really has been narrowed such that all remaining differences we believe ought to be bridgeable, things that we ought to be able to bridge. That said, we have been here before and have not seen the parties come to an agreement. So we are engaged actively in this process. We continue to have officials in the region actively engaged in this process. I can tell you those we have officials back here in Washington who are working on this every day, because a ceasefire to this conflict is long overdue. And it is our hope to get one in the coming weeks, and to start to let Gaza be rebuilt and let people rebuild their lives and their homes and their communities. And we have no higher priority than trying to get that done. When it comes to Syria, so I don't have any announcements to make today about the when we might change our sanctions posture, when we might change the rewards for justice reward that we have put in place. But and that extends to recognition, which is kind of how you started the question as well. But I will say that you have heard the president and the secretary both say that we are going to judge HTS not by the words that they say publicly, but by the actions that they take. And to make clear what we mean by that, so last week, Secretary Blinken announced a number of principles that we thought we believed were important to guide the path forward on behalf of the Syrian people. So those principles included things like an open, inclusive government that was open to religious and ethnic minorities, that was open to all of the various groups across Syria and wasn't just didn't just encompass rule by one of those factions over the broader Syrian people. Called for increasing access and ensuring access to humanitarian assistance to the Syrian people, making sure that Syria did not pose a threat to its neighbors and was not a base for terrorism. And then you saw the secretary last week travel in the region, and attend a meeting of foreign ministers in Aqaba, Jordan, where those principles were endorsed in a statement released by a number of foreign ministers from Syria's neighbors, from other countries in the region, from the United States, and from the European Union. And we believe before we make any changes in our policy, and we have a number of tools at our disposal, not just the listing of HTS as a terrorist organization, not just the bounty on Jelani, but also sanctions that we have imposed on the Syrian regime and other sanctions that we've imposed. Before we look at changing any of those, we want to see actions by the interim authorities in Damascus that are consistent with those principles and make clear that they are going to govern in a way that is responsive to the needs of all of Syrian society and all of the Syrian people. And we're going to be watching that very closely, not just watching, but we're going to be engaged in that process very closely. We have already had initial engagements with HTS to make clear how we see this moving forward and what we see as the appropriate steps for them to take. And we have had engagements already with other actors in Syrian society, because we do believe, look, the fundamental reason why this civil war began and why it continued for so long and why ultimately the Assad regime fell is because he wasn't willing to engage with broad Syrian society. He wasn't willing to be responsive to the needs of his people. And we think it's important that mistake not be repeated. Yeah. Yeah, right there.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm from South Korea too. My question is very simple and clear. President Yoon in South Korea is not currently responding to prosecution's investigation. Do you think the democratic system and constitutional procedures are being followed properly?
So I'm not going to speak to or pass judgment on every action or every statement that President Yoon makes. I will say we have seen, broadly speaking, the constitutional process work as it is intended over the past few weeks. So President Yoon took the action he took. The legislature responded by impeaching him and putting in place an acting president who has now assumed the authorities of president. That is how a democratic system ought to work. And it's how we've seen it work, and that's how we expect it to work going forward. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't bumps along the way. Obviously, democracies can be messy sometimes. We have our own challenges with our own democracy. Those have been well on display, including most notably on January 6th, almost 4 years ago. So, but that said, what we think is important is when democracies have these challenges, that they find a way to move forward with the rule of law determining the outcome to those types of questions. And that's what we have seen so far, and that's what we expect to see. Yeah, just in front of you. Go ahead. Yep, right there.
Thank you. Song from Yonhap News Agency. The trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Japan is something that the Biden administration has focused so much during his term. Do you think that the political turmoil in South Korea will negatively affect trilateral engagement because the Yoon has played a role to strengthen cooperation with Japan and trilateral cooperation? And my second question is on North Korea. You mentioned the possibility of North Korean troops crossing the border into Ukraine yesterday. Do you think that possibility is high?
So let me taking them in order. So look, it's always hard to predict what any change in government means for the future of any policy, and that holds true not just for foreign governments, but for our own government. You've heard me reluctant to speak about what an incoming Trump administration might do on any number of questions. But one thing that doesn't change are the fundamental interests of countries, and it is in the fundamental interest of all three countries, the United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan, to continue that trilateral alliance, especially when you look at the way China has tried to use economic coercion, the way it has tried to use its military power to um, intimidate countries in the region, it is important that the United States and Korea and Japan work together to deal with threats, any threats that China might pose, as well as, of course, the very real threat that the DPRK poses to the security of all three of our countries. And so, while I can't speak for what decisions any one political leader might make, it is fundamentally in the interests of the people of all three countries that that alliance not just continue, but be strengthened. And I very much hope that it will be. When it comes to the second question, so I cannot put a percentage on it, but we have seen North Korea consistently strengthen its relationship with Russia over the past 6 to 9 months. First, by providing military equipment to Russia that Russia began utilizing on the battlefield inside Ukraine to target Ukrainian soldiers. Then, most recently, by providing somewhere over 11,000 troops who traveled from North Korea to Russia and then engaged in the battlefield in Ukraine, and now have started to be wounded and die in battle against Ukrainian soldiers. I can't predict what they will or won't do, but what I can say is that would be a significant escalation for North Korean soldiers to enter a country that has in no way sparked a conflict, has in no way threatened North Korea. For North Korea soldiers to enter Ukrainian territory would be a further escalation and something that would certainly merit a response. Yeah, right next to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Sang Hee-hong from YTN, South Korean News Network. What was the first action taken by U.S. government right after recognizing Yoon's martial law declaration? And what was the response of Korean government or Korean presidential office? Thank you.
First of all, let me just say how happy I am to get all these questions about Korea. I had the privilege of living in Korea when I was a young child for 2 years, and have had the privilege of traveling back a couple of times with the secretary. So to get to take a bunch of questions from Korean journalists is actually just a personal privilege to me. Without giving away too much of diplomatic conversation, so the secretary did talk to the foreign minister. I think it was either the day after or 2 days after the martial law declaration, and we had a number of other conversations, both from our embassy in Seoul and from other officials inside the United States government. And we made clear what our expectation was, which is we wanted to see democracy respected inside Korea. We wanted to see the rule of law upheld. We talked about the importance of our alliance and what our alliance is based on. And one of the fundamental things that underpins our alliance is our shared respect for democratic values. And we made that clear in all of our conversations with officials from the Republic of Korea. Go in the back. Yeah.
Thank you for giving me opportunity. I'm a South Korean correspondent. Some South Korean have speculated that President Yoon Suk-yeol prepared for the second martial law by attacking some places and some political leaders to invoke and incite chaos in South Korea. So, does the U.S. government have some information on this? If so, how would U.S. response?
I just wouldn't want to speak to that or comment on it. That is a matter, like all of these related questions, that really just ought to be handled under Korean law with respect for human rights, in accordance with the Korean Constitution and in accordance with the rule of law. Go to the back over there.
Thanks. David Smith of The Guardian. I wonder, what do you think has been the most important foreign policy legacy of the Biden administration, and would you acknowledge the president and his administration maybe overestimated his influence on Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel?
So when it comes to our most important achievement, accomplishment, however you want to describe it, I'll list one thing that then has an influence in a lot of things. So, and that is the thing that the president charged Secretary Blinken with on day one, and that is to go out and rebuild our alliances and partnerships with countries around the world. So you have to go back and remember where the United States was on January 20th, 2021. Our economy was in free fall. We were dealing with a pandemic that had been mishandled by the previous administration. We were dealing with countries that weren't sure about the future of the United States. We were dealing with a democratic challenge at home. And we were dealing with alliances and partnerships that in many ways had been neglected and countries that had felt mistreated over the previous 4 years. And you had countries questioning whether the United States was going to continue to be there and play the role that it had in the years dating back to the end of World War II. And so he was given an assignment of going out and telling the world that America's back and rebuilding those alliances and partnerships, investing time in them, listening to other countries about what their concerns were and trying to be responsive to them, and telling other countries what our concerns were about how we saw the world, and trying to find a way to work together. And we saw the benefit of that investment we made in our alliances and partnerships when it came to responding to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And all the questions that we often get from domestic media are about the investment that the United States has made in defending Ukraine, over $100 billion now in military support and other support. And the thing that we like to remind them of is it hasn't just been the United States, but we have put together a coalition of more than 50 countries to defend Ukraine and to come to Ukraine's aid. And some of those countries have provided military equipment. Some of them have provided economic support. There are other countries that have provided key diplomatic support and key diplomatic muscle at time. And none of that happened by accident. That happened because the United States stepped up and led the world in marshaling that response. And you can look at, so I said it's a general answer that applies to a number of things. That's probably the best example. But if you look at the way that we have responded to some of China's concerning activities, we have been able to do it, not just as the United States, but with our partners in Europe and our partners in the Indo-Pacific and our partners around the world. And we think that has been enormously to the benefit of the American people, not to mention to the benefit of global stability. When it comes to the Middle East, look, we have all the thing. If there's one thing that I think constantly gets misunderstood or overestimated, it's that the United States has a magic wand that it can wave around the world, that it can force other countries to take actions that they don't want to take. Being the most powerful country in the world is not the same as being all powerful. It just isn't. And every country has to make their own decisions, even countries that are recipients of U.S. military support, U.S. economic support. We get a lot of questions about Israel taking decisions that we don't necessarily agree with, and whether that means we're going to cut off our military support to them. I'm not sure there's a country in the world that we provide military support to where we agree with every decision that they take. We provide military support to other countries in the Middle East. We provide military support to Ukraine. We provide military support to countries in Asia. In most of those cases, we don't agree with every decision that they take. What we try to do is impress upon countries in every circumstance what we believe is in their interest, what we believe is in the interest of the region in which they sit, what we believe is in the interest of stability and security, and is in the interest of advancing human rights. And we make clear what our values are and what our expectations are, and ultimately countries have to make their own decisions. Let me go right there.
Thank you. I'm Patricia from SBT Brazil. United States and Brazil signed last month an agreement on green energy during the G20 summit. Do you expect a significant change on how the U.S. is going to deal economically with countries from the global south, including Brazil, in topics as green energy? And in general lines, what are the main achievements you believe U.S. and Brazil had during this administration?
So I can't speak. I can tell you that over the next 34 days, I don't anticipate any great changes with respect to our support for clean energy and green energy around the world, including in the global south. But I of course can't speak to decisions that the incoming administration will make. As I said, we fundamentally believe it's important to invest in clean energy. You have seen it be a major priority for us here in the United States on the domestic side through some very significant legislation that President Biden worked with Congress to pass in the first 2 years of his term. And you have seen it be a major push for ours diplomatically. because we believe it's fundamental to the future of the world. And when it comes to Brazil, I will say one of the things that we have found to be very important is the way that we've been able to strengthen our diplomatic alliances with Brazil and address environmental concerns, both in Brazil and around the world. And we've been able to have a close working partnership with President Lula's administration on areas of global concern as well. And that's a relationship between our two countries that is based fundamentally in the relationship between our two peoples, who of course have longstanding people-to-people ties, and one that ought to continue well into the future. Go behind you, back there.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'm Marcin Antosiewicz with Polish Public Television TVP. Secretary Blinken is traveling tomorrow to New York to chair 2 meetings on the UN Security Council. And the first meeting will focus on the implications of artificial intelligence for the maintenance of international peace and security. Can you tell us more about it? And can you tell us how is the Department of State using already the AI to conduct foreign policy and effective diplomacy?
Yeah, so the future of AI is something that obviously presents challenges and opportunities in the diplomatic space, the same way it presents challenges and opportunities across just about every sector of our economy, not just the United States economy, but economies around the world. Let me speak to first. So we have tried to outline some clear principles that we think ought to govern the use of AI going forward by militaries, going forward by countries around the world. And you've seen the Secretary outline those in a number of speeches, and I won't go through them all here, but it's been a major focus of ours because this emerging technology is so key to our shared future. And I'll just say, just kind of speaking on behalf of the State Department, so we have embraced, at the Secretary's insistence and his instruction, have embraced the use of artificial intelligence inside the State Department, and actually just rolled out several months ago a new tool called State Chat that is the first kind of department-wide AI chatbot that department officials, diplomats, both here in Washington and around the world, can use for some of the kind of tasks that they don't like doing every day. You know, diplomats have to write a lot of kind of memos and summaries of conversations, and in a lot of ways work that if they didn't have to spend so much time doing, they could be freed up to be out working with other countries and meeting with community leaders in the countries in which they operate. And we have deployed AI to help diplomats across the world work on things like drafting memos, translating documents, summarizing things into bullet points. It has been extremely successful product just in the 4 months since it was launched in August. And we will continue to sort of emphasize that as an important tool for us to use forward, because it really does, in our view, is a force multiplier that can free our diplomats up to go out and do the things that diplomats ought to be doing, which is engaging with the countries in which they serve. Yeah, all the way at the very back.
Thank you very much. This is Fayaz Nair from Pakistan Awaz TV Network. My question is that Afghanistan, it seems that has been forgotten story for the American administration. Pakistan government has been insisting for America that and the global powers that they should act collectively, because Afghanistan is not safe place for not only the region but throughout the world. What is will you please let us know that what is the considerations of the American administration about Afghanistan?
About Afghanistan?
Yes.
So I can tell you that we continue to remain incredibly focused on Afghanistan. The Secretary was up testifying before Congress about Afghanistan last week, taking questions not just about our withdrawal in Afghanistan, but the future of our Afghan policy. I'd say we are committed to the Afghan people, their human rights, and their welfare. We remain, even after our withdrawal, the largest single provider of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. That's I think somewhere over $1.1 billion now since August of 2021. And I will say, you know, if you look at the sweep of Afghanistan over the 3 plus years since the Taliban resumed control over the country, The Taliban said and this is something that's instructive when we talk about what's the future of Syria. This Taliban, when it resumed control, said to the people of Afghanistan and said to the international community that they wanted to govern with a different face and that they wanted to be more inclusive and they wanted to be more respectful of rights. And we made very clear that if the Taliban were to actually govern in a way that respected the rights of the people of Afghanistan and especially respected the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, we would be prepared to have a different policy. And what we have seen from the Taliban instead is repression, especially of women and girls, crackdown on the rights of people inside Afghanistan. And so you see Afghanistan continued to be kind of an international pariah because of the decisions that have been taken by the Taliban. And so we will continue to work with our allies and partners in the region and around the world to make clear to the Taliban that if they want to have any path forward that includes international recognition, that includes normal relationships with other countries, then that starts by a change in behavior at home. And it starts by treating their people, and especially treating women and girls with the fundamental dignity and respect for human rights that they're entitled to. Let's go right there. Well, yeah, we'll do both of you. I'm gonna do two more. Do both. Yeah, both of you there.
Thank you. My name is Haik Napetyan. I'm reporter from Armenia. Matt, last week, Secretary traveled to Turkey in modern terms, and I was wondering if the relations between Armenia and Turkey and the process between Armenia and Azerbaijan also been brought up in his negotiation with Turkish counterpart, and also a question regarding the fate of Armenian POWs and politicians that are in the prisons of Azerbaijan. At this point, actually, the American lawyer of one of them, Jared Genser, the lawyer of Ruben Vardanyan, says his access to Azerbaijan is being denied. He's not allowed to see the person whom he's supposed to defend. So I was wondering if you have any comments on this, and if there's anything that the administration or the embassy to Azerbaijan can do to make sure that the basic rights of Armenians in the prisons of Azerbaijan are protected.
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about the private diplomatic conversations that we had when the secretary was in the region last week, but I can tell you that, of course, the relationship between Turkey and Armenia is something that we regularly engage with officials from both countries on, and I think best to leave it at that. When it comes to the status of prisoners being held inside Azerbaijan, and without speaking to any one particular case, you have seen us consistently call for Azerbaijan to respect the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all persons inside its country, including prisoners. You have seen us take actions when we have not seen Azerbaijan respecting the fundamental human rights of all persons inside Azerbaijan, and we'll continue to pursue that policy. Now, right in front of you.
Thank you so much. My name is Sergey Yumatov with the Russian TASS news agency. My question is about Ukraine. Just yesterday, President-elect Donald Trump said that Ukraine should be prepared to reach a deal with Russia. So my question is, do you expect Ukraine to be prepared to reach a deal with Russia? Do you communicate with the Ukrainian authorities on this topic? And do you communicate with the incoming administration on this issue?
So we have communicated with the incoming administration about a whole host of foreign policy issues. Obviously, President Biden met with President-elect Trump at the White House just 2 days after the election, and Secretary Blinken has had an initial conversation with Secretary-designate Marco Rubio, and of course, the White House National Security Advisor has been public about the fact that he's talked with the incoming National Security Advisor on a number of occasions. I would just say this: I don't think it is for anyone outside of Ukraine to dictate to Ukraine if and when they ought to enter negotiations. Ukraine is a country that is a victim of Russia's aggression, and they ought to be the ones that decide the path forward for their country. And that includes if and when they enter into negotiations. It is Ukraine that has borne the brunt of Russia's aggression, that has seen its villages conquered, that has seen its people suffer from war crimes and atrocities. They have earned the right to make those decisions. No one else in the world has earned the right to make them for them. And with that, it's probably a good place. Let me go one more in the very back, and then we'll wrap. I got another minute. Alex, you don't get a second bite of the apple. You were at my briefing and got 4 or 5 questions. Let's let someone else have a turn.
Thank you. Gülay Kaplan from TRT World. You talked about the accountability for killing or harming American citizens. Could you expand on what steps has the Biden administration taken to ensure accountability and justice for the killing of American citizen Ayşe Nur Ezgi Egi during the peaceful protests in the West Bank?
Yeah. So I can tell you that we have made clear to the government of Israel that her killing was unacceptable, that it never should have happened, that we wanted to see an immediate investigation. And if the investigation showed wrongdoing, that there ought to be accountability. But that just as importantly, we didn't just want to see accountability for her death, but we wanted to see a change to the rules of engagement under which the IDF operates to prevent such incidents from happening again, because she is not the first American citizen who has been killed by Israeli forces through no fault of their own. And so this has been a consistent topic of engagement between the United States and the government of Israel. I can tell you they have told us that they are in the final stages of closing their investigation, finalizing their investigation. We have made clear to them that when they finish that investigation, we want to be briefed on the results of it. We want to know exactly what happened and why it happened and who was at fault, and what Israel is doing to make sure such incidents don't happen again. Because, as I said, her death never should have happened. She was there attending a peaceful protest, and we want to see answers. We want to give her family answers. Secretary met with her family yesterday because they have a right to know and they have a right to demand accountability, and we share their demands for it. And with that, we'll wrap for today. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I really enjoyed it, and appreciate all the work that you do.